Check. Check, check. Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Cool. How's everybody doing today?
Good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Let's see. So how did everybody do with the assignment of the just basic web page with a few elements and things in it?
Good, but I have a couple of questions, like especially changing font size and image size, and I don't know why, but my text, like for the second and third paragraph, suddenly everything was bold.
Okay.
And I don't know how that happened.
Okay. Well, we're actually gonna as far as things like governing setting text size or sizing of images and things like that, that's what you would actually do that using CSS rather than in the HTML directly.
Okay.
So that's all that much is going to be covered by today's lesson. Let's see. Would everybody mind just sharing in the chat the links to your projects?
Are we just copying and pasting the glitch link?
Actually, there is actually a specific. Here, I'll share my screen really quick, and I'll show you the way I'd like you to submit those. So so what I'd like you to do is go to click the share button, and then down here the code link, copy that one and send me that. And then what I'll do is I'll request editing access to your project. And then that way I can edit your code directly. Okay, so I'm just going to do these in the order that they come in. So we will start with Gabriella.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I did my site on like a legend of how coffee came to be.
Cool.
It's really short. I think I only had problems with the link at the end because when I tried opening the link, it just says it's not found. And I tried looking up how to fix that, but it didn't work out. Yeah, okay, but it works now.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that might have just been a problem with this website. Like with the it's possible that this is like that this blog post got like went offline, like just the link broke for a bit or something like that.
Okay.
But okay, this is looking good, and it looks like you got some you did some styling as well. You added color, and you added
I think
okay.
some of it's from the original, like the layouts.
Okay.
The original, the initial like heading, I just changed the title. The only thing I've changed is the paragraphs and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I see. You did a
I did a remix.
Yeah, but you started with the Hello app default rather than the Hello website default. So this starts. So I actually haven't seen any of this before because this you actually yeah, okay.
I'm still a bit confused about the hidden like code in the HTML. I understand the part like after
the comments, you mean?
Yeah, those. Like I didn't know what I was supposed to. If I was supposed to just leave them or?
You can, yeah. I mean, again, the point of a comment is literally just to read, is just basically to leave notes for anyone reading the source code. Like a lot of times it'll be used like sort of. So for instance, here, a lot of the comments in these starter templates are just sort of like, explanatory, just explanatory comments that tell you what the different parts of the page are. And this is full of lots of them because it's meant for, these are literally just instructions for whoever is working on this. Comments also get used a lot to, like if I drop a comment, or I can't, but another use you'll see for comments is is that people will use comments to remove a line of code from execution without deleting it entirely from source. So for instance, like if I had for instance, say there was like there were other links down here that I wasn't 100% certain I wanted to use or something like that, but I didn't want to delete them entirely and then have to remake them. I could just wrap them in a comment and then they wouldn't render, but they would still be in there.
Okay.
Is that clear? Does that clear it up? Does that answer your question about them?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's just, so these are more explanatory comments, but then you'll also see sort of like, you'll see comments used to remove lines of code from execution. Okay. Yeah, so this is let's see. Yeah, so this, because you went with the Hello app starter project rather than the Hello website starter project, there's like a whole bunch of extra stuff in here that's like sort of, there's all like there's all this meta content that's a little beyond sort of like how deep we're gonna go. Sarah, you had a question?
Yeah, so I actually also did this and I realized I did that because if you go into the glitch website and click on hello website, this is the template that shows up.
Really?
Yeah,
That's new.
like if you go into new project and do that.
Glitch hello website,
Mm-hmm.
and then it.
And then if you go into the CSS or whatever that page was.
Wow, yeah, they really changed this since the last time I was in here, since like several months ago. Okay. Wow, good to know. This used to be a lot simpler. I actually kind of I don't know how I feel about this, honestly, because like I would not like sort of all of this meta content is like way beyond what we're gonna cover. But okay, good to know. This looks completely different than it did last semester. But thanks for pointing that out. Okay, I will bear that in mind going forward. But so anyway, let me just keep looking through here. Okay. So the only nitpick that I have is that the one is that is just like one little subtle thing with your headings, which is that H1 should only appear once per page, and you have an H1 at the top here, and then you have another H1 down here. So this should be an H2 rather than an H1.
Okay. Yeah.
But otherwise, indentation mostly looks pretty good. There's one that's a little out of place here. But that's okay. I would be a little wary of sort of leaving this much white space between the start of a tag and the like sort of and like the first property. I wouldn't do more than just a space, just because it can be it's just better to keep that kind of tight, you know. But otherwise, yep, I would suggest you know, as always, just sort of like the only thing aside from that H1 issue, the only thing I'm really seeing here that that might need some attention is there's a little bit of indentation stuff, you know, sort of like your indentation is good up until here, and then sort of like once this paragraph comes in, you kind of lose it. You kind of lose the continuity. Like, see how this A closing tag is inside a paragraph, but so it should be indented like so since this is a child, since this anchor, this link is a child of this paragraph, what we would expect to see is that this be tabbed over a couple more times to be further tabbed over than the closing tag of its parent. And then this is into, you know, so it's, you know, kind of, it's easy to tell here that like the div is the parent of the paragraph, but sort of then, you know, what's the relationship here, you know? So if the indentation is correct, that's easy to it's easy to tell those things just at a glance. But otherwise, this is looking nice. And there's a button in your, in a glitch project, there's a button that says, let me see if I go here. There's this button here at the top that says format this file. If you click that, it'll correct your indentation for you. But if you have any errors in your code, it'll break and it'll point and it'll tell you where the errors are. So you kind of have to like, this is kind of the format this file button is a little bit of a shortcut, but it doesn't work unless it doesn't work if there's anything broken in your file. But it is helpful. Okay, so that's that one. Nicely done. Let's see.
Yeah.
So next up I have Daphne's. Okay. Cool. All right. I see you used dessert themed lorem ipsum generator here.
Called a cupcake ipsum.
Cupcake ipsum. That's great. Cool. Okay. Yep. And then we have.
I was having trouble getting the button to work as a link.
Okay, let's look at your code.
And I think I also did the app. Maybe that's.
Yeah, I think this is just what this looks. Okay, so the button, okay. So what I would do is actually, I wouldn't use that button element here. That has sort of like a specific kind of a specific functionality that that's a little beyond what sort of like what we need for the purposes of this assignment. So we're going to come back to sort of like later on when we get into JavaScript, we'll talk about sort of buttons and form elements and things like that. But for the purpose of this assignment, I would say just use don't use the button element at all. If you take out, if you just use the link, just the ahref part, then it should work as intended.
Okay.
And then using, and honestly, a lot of times, things that look like buttons on a web page might not necessarily be the button element. They might be links that have been styled to look like buttons, because you can you can adjust the size and the border and the roundness of the corners and things like that, and take any element and make it look like a button, basically. So if what you want is that, what you want is that look of sort of like the all the padding and the rounded borders, you can get that without having to use a button element.
So buttons are more specific, but you can always use
Yes.
a class to sort of make a link look like a button.
Yeah.
If it's just a link. Whereas
Yes.
a button might be something with like more of an action, I'm guessing.
Yeah, a button might. So for instance, in the context of say like a form or something like that, the submit button at the end of a form performs a specific role that's a little more in depth, that when you click that button, it performs a form action. It submits the form. That's a little bit, that's a slightly more in-depth process than just navigating to another, like navigating to to a hyperlink. So yeah, so that's the kind of place where you're more likely to see when there's sort of like a slightly more a slightly more sort of programmatic function that needs to be done, something that's beyond like a little more complicated than just sort of like basic navigation. But otherwise, this is looking, your indentation is good. Yep. Okay. Okay. I'm assuming the yeah. Okay. Yeah, I kind of have some feelings about this new template because it's just like so much more complicated than the old one was. And I don't really see the value add. But that's, you know, that's just me. Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay. But yeah, but your work looks nice here. Well done. Okay, so then Henrico.
Yeah, mine looks very ugly. And I don't know, like that very first picture, it was so big, it kind of blew up over the whole page. And yeah, it's not even on there completely.
Gotcha. Right. Okay. All right. And then this is where you sort of everything, you mentioned you had that issue with everything sort of going bold from here on out.
Yeah, like after the second whale image, just everything got bold, or like also underneath that video link already. I have no idea why.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's see, it's a okay. So one thing to note is that you've got you're using the uh 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 the detail list syntax here, right? You've got this DT like detail title and detail description.
Mhm.
The thing is that here, let me request to join the project. The thing is that I'll tell you what, I'll just do this. I'll do the remix so that now I can make some edits, but it won't, this would be the edits I make aren't going to be
Do I
directly in
have
your
to do anything here?
nope.
Okay.
This is just, I'm just like what I like, this is just making a copy of your work that I can
Okay.
edit.
Okay.
I'll just let this load. But so the thing is that the DT and the DD element need to have need to be in are elements that need to have a specific parent in order to function the way they're supposed to function. They need to be inside a detail list element.
Mhm.
So I have a like if you recall from last week, there are three kinds of lists. There's the ordered list, which then takes list items. There's the unordered list, which also takes list items. And so here we would end up with list items numbered 1, 2, 3, etc. And here we would end up with a bullet list. But the thing is that the list item has to be inside either an ordered or unordered list. And the ordered list and unordered list need to have, it won't display right if the immediate children aren't list item elements. And here, and with the DT and the DD elements, it's the same kind of thing. These don't work right unless you put them inside a description list element.
Okay.
So I have a feeling. Oh, okay. Wait. I see why the bold is happening. You have a strong tag opened here, which is a tag that sets anything inside it boldface.
Mm-hmm.
And so you open that tag at the end of this paragraph, and
Oh,
then
and
you
then
never
it opens
close
up
it.
for everything.
Yep,
Ah,
for
okay,
everything that
okay.
follows, because it doesn't stop until it sees a closing tag. So,
Okay, got it.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
if-
thought I just sort of tried to delete everything from the HTML that was in the hello page, but I must
Sure.
have missed something.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's I'm guessing that's exactly what happened. That there was something that was bold-faced in there, and you deleted the end, the closing tag, but forgot to delete the beginning tag.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so now the boldface is gone. So this, and functionally this looks the same as it did before, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's valid HTML. Sometimes things will render and will appear to look right, but they won't necessarily be following the correct, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've followed the correct structural conventions of the way it's supposed to be written. So that is something to pay, especially as you're starting out. It can be very easy to miss mistakes because the browser will just try to render, and it'll try its hardest to make to display whatever information it's given. So it can be very easy to miss things like this when you're starting out, because it looks right in the browser, but that doesn't mean that it's properly formatted code.
Yeah.
Other than that, okay, nice. You included an umlaut character.
Yes. I tried that out.
Nice. Okay, cool.
And how can I center like headlines, like titles in the page, like the others did?
That's another CSS rule as well.
Okay, got it.
So yeah, this has a lot of default stuff in it. This is, wow, I'm kind of stunned that this is like a this is a 105 line style.css file for a beginner project. This used to have this starter CSS file used to have 2 things in it, and it was less than 10 lines long. Like I'm really stunned that they would add all this stuff, and I really don't see the value add. But that's just, I guess I'll have to take that up with them. But okay, cool. Yeah. So things like so display sort of properties of display, like text alignment, text size, text direction. We can make text run vertically instead of horizontally. All of those fall under the umbrella of style rules and are all governed from CSS.
Okay, and image size as well.
Yep, and image size. Yep. Those things, there are ways to do that stuff just in HTML, but they're very outdated. That's
okay.
For instance, you could center text by doing you could center text by using the center end element. If I put your H2 inside the center, or here, we'll do it on. So that centered the text.
Mhm.
But the thing is, centering text using the centering text using or centering elements of any kind using this element has been obsolete for decades at this point. This is a it hasn't been removed from the language, but this has been deprecated since about 2002 or 2003, I would say. This
Oh,
is
wow.
a
Okay.
this is a very GeoCities and Netscape Navigator way to do centering text or centering elements. So
Okay, got it.
it's there, but you should not use it. Likewise, you can size images by just using the inline width, and there's a height attribute as well. I could do that. But again, this is also exactly the same thing applies to this. Defining the width and height of something in using the width and height the width and height HTML properties is completely outdated and basically just still there for backwards compatibility and has been deprecated and has not been the right way to do things since the early 2000s. So
Okay.
so again, it's there. Don't be tempted to use it. We're going to be we're going to go over how to do that using CSS today. But otherwise, otherwise this is looking great. This is a great first start. Okay, so now Chloe.
Yes. This was very difficult.
Oh yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Just because like the language, like on the index page, I was trying to watch like YouTube tutorials and stuff, but I realized, like you said, like they've changed so much of it. I think the version before was a lot more simple.
It was much simpler before.
Yeah, but
I'm wondering if that old, I think, you know what I'm gonna do? I think I have I might still have like a vestigial copy, like just forked in my own code of the old web page template. And I might just like send that out as a class example and have everybody start your projects by remixing from that instead of this starter project, because this is just too complicated. Like literally, we don't need any of this stuff. Like,
yeah,
you're a beginner. Why do you care about a Twitter card? Like,
yeah. So I was like scrolling through the top part, trying to find where I can change the title text. And then it was kind of just like trial and error, but then I don't actually think I understood the language so much.
Okay. I understand that. I mean, that's, that's understandable given sort of like the nature of what we're dealing with here. So don't feel too bad about it if this was confusing.
Okay.
I mean, quite honestly, especially if you've like, quite honestly, a lot of this material is just confusing the first time around, because you have to sort of, because it can feel very unintuitive, and it's very sort of like, trying to fit a square. It feels like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when you're trying to wrap your brain around sort of like the way that, because all of these languages are designed for computers to understand, and then computers first and people second, right? So it's all so you have to so it can just take some time to get used to like just getting in the mindset of like thinking you know,
Thinking like a computer.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So but it does get, it's one of those things sort of like, it's just an issue, it's just a matter of practice. The more you work with it, the more you read it, the more it'll feel like second nature.
Okay.
So let's look at okay. Okay. Yep, your indentation looks good. Okay, yep, and you have a link, and on it, yep, this is all looking good to me.
Okay. So is the indentation just for like your own benefit because everything is more organized, or like it doesn't read properly if it's not indented properly?
It's really it's mostly for the benefit of a human reader,
Okay.
of someone reading your source code, whether that is you, or whether that's you, or whether it's me.
Right.
But it also just I mean, as you scale up to sort of something on the level of, imagine building a website as as big as, as deep a content, a deep an amount of content, or as deep a feature set as something like Wikipedia or Facebook or something like that. When you have like teams of developers working on it, everybody has to be, sort of like, you should never assume that you are the first, and you should never assume that you are the last person who will ever be reading your code or be working with your code, if like, especially if you're in a professional setting.
Yeah.
You will be, it is very rare in a professional setting to start from scratch. You will, by and large, you will be jumping into an existing code base, and and probably that code base will last at that job longer than you will. So it's it will outlast you. So you need to be thinking about the people who are going to be coming behind you and making updates to your code later.
Right.
So it's the short answer is, I guess the short answer is like, yes, it is more about people reading it than about a computer rendering it properly. But as soon as you start scaling up, that becomes more and more important,
Yeah.
Okay. You have a is this
That it was just like I added that because I wanted the spacing in between the first paragraph and second paragraph. It was another one of those trial and error things.
Yeah, I figured as much. This isn't the way you would do white space. There are two things you can do. You can use the line break element, but that's slightly that's kind of the lazy way to do it. The way that we would do the way that we would actually do this is to use CSS properties of margin and padding.
Okay.
So we can set how much, if you imagine that there's like, a border around this, margin is the distance outside the border, and padding is the distance inside between the content and the edge. So, and I have, this is something that we're going to cover in the lecture today.
Okay.
So, but once again, as seems to be my answer to lots of questions in today's assignment, that's something you solve with CSS, and we'll be going over it shortly.
Okay.
This is looking good though.
Thank
Nicely
you.
done. Okay, and Sarah. Okay. We have a Billie Eilish fan site. Cool. Okay. Okay. So let's
Wait,
just
did
look
the
at.
link work?
Hmm?
Did the
Oh.
link work?
Yeah.
Millions
Okay.
of people are quitting.
So. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We really don't need all this extra, all this junk. Like,
I did have a question. Like, if you go up a bit, like, or yeah, where it says like the title, like you can that title. What's the difference between that title and like
okay.
the
Yeah.
actual title?
So, remember that the head of your HTML document is most of this stuff is not meant to be human readable. And none of this is what appears in the actual body of the page, right? So the title attribute or the title element,
Yeah.
this sets the text here in like the top,
Oh, okay.
in like the browsers, in like the browser tab. It's completely separate from the, from any of the actual, body content of the page.
Okay. And
Um,
then it's always just the like bracket title goes for the web browser tab.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. And it can only be text characters, nothing else. It can only be it can which can include things like emojis and stuff,
Okay.
but it has to be, you can't like put images in there or anything like that.
Okay.
So, and even if you notice like the little icon in the top here,
Mhm.
that is set, that is this, the
Oh, the icon.
the favicon. Yeah. So it's a very specific file. It always has to be .ico, and it has to be like under a certain size. I think it has to be like 32 by 32 pixels. I honestly, when I'm setting, if I were putting in a custom favicon, I would usually like, I don't know, make a little image in Photoshop and then like save it as a PNG. And there are websites that, will just convert formats for you.
Okay. What is the REL equals?
This is a so I think it stands for relation. It just tells you it's just telling you what the link is pointing, what kind of thing the link is pointing to. So the most common thing you'll see is in the case of linking style sheets, as we're going to do in the lecture portion today. When we do link rel equals style sheet, that tells what we're specifying is that like we're specifying the kind of content that we're linking into this document.
Oh, okay.
Really, you do not need to worry at all at this point in your web dev career. You shouldn't be worrying about things like canonicals for SEO and things like that at this point, or like any of this stuff. You can like literally all of this stuff you can just ignore. The only thing that you really need to worry about with respect to this link tag is using it to bring style sheets in.
Sorry, could you explain what a link tag is versus the
yeah. So the link tag is for importing content into this web page and like linking it into the page. The anchor, the A tag, is it just so happens to be also called a link, just like in common vernacular, but the link tag is not a clickable link. It is it's a file or a document that is linked to the HTML document you're looking at.
Okay.
Whereas the A tag is a link that you can click and that you can follow to go to another website or a different part of the same website.
Got it.
Cool. Okay, so okay, it looks like maybe you did the same thing here of just putting in an empty paragraph to make space.
I think I was gonna put another paragraph and then I forgot to like
Okay.
delete it. Yeah.
Gotcha. That's a lot more common than you'd think. This is okay. Your comment is a little misformed here. You need the it won't register as register as a comment unless you have like left bracket, exclamation point, and the 2 dashes. So if you look here, let's see, what point is that? Like, just see how this isn't how this is showing up as white as white instead of as grayed out here. So if I inspect the code, okay, again, see how the the browser actually caught that mistake for you and is actually interpreting that as a comment. See how it like made that it's fixing that on the fly. But the thing is, you shouldn't the thing is that you shouldn't get in the habit of relying on the browser to relying on no, because first of all, not every browser might do that. Like if I'm looking in Firefox or Safari, this might show up, that malformed comment might just show up as text. Especially if you get to the point of using of building more full-scale apps using a framework like say React.js or Vue.js or anything that's using like a templating language, where it has to kind of like compile down into finished code from like where you're writing sort of like components that then compile down into finished code. This is the kind of thing that can break a build process on one of those really easily. You know, that's obviously sort of you know, that's more on the speed of stuff that we're going to cover that we cover in coding too. But it's good to start paying attention to that stuff and looking out for it now before it becomes a problem down the line. But other than that, this is looking good to me.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, I think that's everybody. Yep. Okay, so with that said, let's get started with some CSS. We're going to talk about how to write CSS rules, how to associate them with a certain element, like how to apply them to the document. And we're going to look at a few different things. We're going to mostly focus on typographical stuff today, and then we'll get into sort of more layout and position and sizing kind of stuff in next week. But so CSS stands for cascading style sheets. We refer to them as cascading style sheets because of the way that the rules in sort of like flow and inherit from each other. They can you can include multiple style sheets in a document, and if you and the rules from the first one will fall or cascade from one style sheet into any other style sheets that follow. This allows you to include multiple style sheets in a document, which as a project goes up to gets up to starts to scale up into getting larger, that can be very convenient to sort of separate out different sort of roles into different style sheets. You can write them in a standalone CSS file with the .css extension, or you can write them directly in HTML inside a style element or style tag. Although basically, sometimes I'll write basically, like if I'm rapid prototyping something and just starting like a quick sketch, I'll write write rules in a style tag. But basically, as soon as it gets to be more than like just if it gets to be more than like a few rule declarations, I'll move them into a standalone CSS file. Usually that's what you're going to want to do, is you're going to want to keep your style. You're going to want to keep your style rules in external CSS files rather than writing them in markup. There's also you can also define what we call inline styles, which are for each specific element. Each element has a style attribute, and you can use that to just write CSS directly for that element. But that has a very specific use case that you shouldn't worry about right now. That's more or less basically we're going to come back to that in a few weeks when we start talking about JavaScript, because when you start manipulating the appearance of an element on the fly, you're basically like, that's the you manipulate its style attribute, or that's one way that's done. But you shouldn't really, unless you expect those styles to change, you really shouldn't write them there. Like most of the time, you're going to want to, you're almost all the time that you're writing style rules, you're going to want to keep them in a style sheet. And we always link that style sheet in the head of the document. Now, there's one specific form of style sheet that I always include whenever I'm working on a project, and that's what's called a CSS reset. Now, the idea behind a CSS reset is that different browsers have slightly different default styles. If you take, just a basic raw HTML page and put it in Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Internet Explorer, it's going to look slightly different in all of those, in each of those browsers, just because they have things like, say, different default text sizes for an H1, or different default padding for a border, or different default text indent for a bullet list, or things like that. So a CSS reset sheet compensates for those inconsistencies, so that you're starting from the same base set of styles, regardless of what browser you use. And this always goes in before any of your own style sheets. it's and that was so that way your styles are always falling, that your styles are, everything you write comes after the CSS reset, and builds on top of those styles. There's a bunch of them out there. If you search CSS reset, you'll find a bunch of different options. There's one that there's a popular one that's kind of like the guy that came up with the concept of the CSS reset. So you might see links to the Eric Meyer reset. That one's pretty good, but the one that I specifically like to recommend is this one, normalize.css. It's popular, it's easy to use, and it's been you can see it's like sort of like as of like a few years ago, it was still getting really actively maintained. It's still this one still works fine to me. But again, this is the kind of thing like if there's some major shift in, it's been a while since they've rolled out a major update to HTML and CSS, like not since the since like sort of around like 2012, I don't think. But in the case that that were to happen, I might, and this didn't sort of like get some updates, I might not, I might start looking around for something a little more up to date. But for now, this is working just fine. So the way you use this is there are a few ways. You can either download this file, like I'm just going to do save as and save it as a, you can just do like, just save that CSS file, or you can use it from what's called a CDN. And I'll show you how to do that when we get into the project here. So how do CSS rules work? There are three basic elements of a CSS rule. We have our selector, which selects the element or elements that we want to style. Then we have a set of declarations within these brackets. Like it'll always be selector, then curly brackets, and then we can have as many rule declarations as we want, but each declaration is made up of a property and a value. So the property is, what about this element do we want to change? Or what about this element's appearance do we want to change? And then the value is, what do we want to change? Is what do we want this element's appearance to be? What do we want to change this property to? So in this case, we're picking the color and we're setting it to a hex value of, I believe this is a gray. Color specifically refers to text color, by the way. The color property refers to is sets text color. When we'll come back to that in a second. So yep, selector, brackets, property, colon, value, semicolon. That's the gist of basically the way you write CSS. Now, there's all different kinds of CSS selectors, but the ones that we're going to be running into the most are the element selector, which is just the HTML name. This is good for very broad general rules, because it will, so, say you want to select every paragraph on your page and set the margin for all paragraphs. You can just use P as your selector and it'll select every P tag on the page. But if you want anything specific, it's not great for that. It's meant to be it's a broad stroke selection. But then, if we want to get more specific, we can select elements by their class property. So we can say on an element, say we have div class equals title or something like that. Class equals, whatever. We can use that class name as a selector. This is the one that you're going to see kind of the most commonly used for applying styles. Class names are kind of like the standard way to select, or kind of the most standard way to select elements in CSS. They're very handy because classes can be reused and applied to multiple elements. So if I have a class name, like say, yellow box, which say styles things to be to have like styles blocks of text to have like a yellow background and a black border, something like that. I can reuse that class name over and over again as many times as I want. I can also give an element more than one class. In fact, I think I am not sure if there is an upper limit on how many classes you can give an element at one time, but it's a lot. I've seen it's very common, especially sort of if you're inspecting the source of a very large website, or one built using a certain framework, certain kinds of frameworks, to see elements with just like a massive list of class names on them, like 30, 40 classes on just one element alone. So that they're many to many, and that can be, so that's their strength. An element can have, like, a class can be reused multiple times across multiple elements, and an element can have many classes. So this is pretty flexible. And we can dynamically add and remove them on the fly using JavaScript, which we'll come back to. Quick and easy way to get visual effects that look really complicated, but without actually anywhere near as much of a lift as you might expect. And then the next most common elements, the next most common one you're going to see is the ID, which is in the same way that elements have a class property that we just can give a name to. Elements have an ID property that we can give a name to. IDs are, and this is what we use in the internal linking on a web page, like say imagine on Wikipedia the table of contents of an article, and when you click on one of those things, it jumps down to that section of the page. That's jumping to the element that matches a certain ID. But we can also use it as a CSS selector. The thing about the ID, as it works pretty similarly to the class name, except that it's even more specific, because IDs can only be used once per page. They're unique identifiers. So if you give an element, say you have a link on, say you have an element on your page with an ID of foo, you can never use the ID foo again on that page. They're one-to-one. There can only be one element on a time with a given ID, and an element can only have one ID. No two elements on the page can share the same ID. These are generally, you generally see these used more in JavaScript than in CSS. But even then, as a selector, I should say, because as you're going to see when we get to JavaScript, we select elements, we apply functionality to elements in JavaScript using a very, very similar method to the way we attach styles to elements in CSS. So we'll see. Well, we might see a bit more of the ID in there in the JavaScript world, but it can be used in CSS as well. And so let's just illustrate what these look like. So this is my element selector. If the element is a div, I target it by just writing the word div and then my rule definition. If I'm targeting something by its class name, we can see that I have div class equals foo, and I write dot foo. This is like, we call this dot notation. So this is how you target elements by their class name is with the in your style sheet, you write dot and the class name. And then for IDs, with the given ID bar, we select that using a hash. So that's just a quick illustrative of the way that we use these selectors in practice and what it actually looks like in a style sheet. Now, what kind of things do we do with CSS? Color rules, text color, background color, color of borders, etc., etc. We can also, all of our typography rules, font family, font size, text alignment, font style, is it italicized or not? Font weight, is it bold-faced or not? All of your typographical rules. Letter spacing, word spacing, etc. We can also set sizes of things. We can do that using fixed units of measure like pixels or points, or we can use relative sizes. And there's a number of these, but we can use percentages. And then we can also use a relative unit of measure called M, which we'll loop back to in just a couple minutes here. But that scales things based on what your based on what the font size of an element in a given element is. It can be really handy for sizing things proportionally based on your text size. So then also positioning. Positioning in CSS is kind of a whole thing to wrap your head around. So that's going to be basically all we talk about next week. But it's going to be most of what we talk about next week. Yeah, it's a little complicated, but we can get a very fine degree of control over how to position things on a web page. And then we have what's called the box model, which consists of the margin, the border, and the padding of an element. Here's a graphic illustrating the way the box model works. Imagine that we have, say, a paragraph element with a chunk of text in it. That would be here in this content area. The distance between the outer edge of the element and between the edges of the content itself and the outer edge of the containing element, we can set that distance using the property called padding. The border itself also can be padding. We can define the size. We can define we can just give it a size value, say 5 pixels or something like that. Border gives us we can set the thickness of the border with the size of it, but we can also set the border style and color. So we can say, we can tell it to be, say, a 2 pixel solid black line, or 2 pixel thick solid black line. We can tell it to be a a 3-pixel thick dotted gray line. We could tell it to be, you know, a 1-pixel thick dashed blue line, etc., etc. So that one's got a bit more. We can also define we can also define things like the border radius, which is we can set curve on the corners of the border to get to round off the corners. So that one's got a bit more control to it. Then the distance between the outer edge of the border and the beginning of the next element in the document flow is what's called the margin. The outer, so this is outer spacing. Padding is inner spacing, margin is outer spacing. And again, like padding, the only thing that you set with margin is the width. Now, when we get into styling text, we're going to see, and there are a number of these. There are a number of situations where you'll see this, but like backgrounds, borders, etc. But text rules are one of the first places where you're going to see places where we can write CSS rules either as some properties can be written as multiple individual properties with one value each, or as what we call a compound or shorthand property, where we take multiple values and express them all on one line. So for instance, here, I can either individually line by line state font weight bold, font style italic, font size 36 pixels, font family, Times New Roman, comma serif. By the way, what's happening here with the comma serif, in the case that this font didn't load for some reason, it's telling us we're setting the general family to fall back to. For instance, if for some reason we can't load Times New Roman, just load the next serif font you can find. That's what this is saying. So we have 4 properties here. We can express those on one line as just font colon bold italic 36 pixels Times New Roman serif. There are some cases where, and I mean, there's a certain amount to which this is personal preference as to which one you use. I usually write my font styles out in a compound property like this, but if I'm setting like background images, I prefer to write out the multiple individual properties. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it. Obviously, one is a little bit more verbose. So if you're trying to save keystrokes, the compound property would be preferable. But beyond that, it's like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's up to you. Now, color. I mentioned before that the color rule sets text color. Things like the background color you set using the background attribute. The border, like the colors of borders, you set using the border attribute. So here, given a div, for a div given class foo, this rule is going to set text color green, background color blue, and 1 pixel solid red, a border that's a 1 pixel thick solid red line.
Carl, I have a
Yes.
question.
Sure.
What is actually foo?
That's just a placeholder. That's just a that's
Like,
just
what is it changing?
What's that? What is it? What?
Like, which element is that changing if we use .foo?
It's just a class name. It's whichever element in the document has foo as its class name.
Oh.
Foo is just kind of this is just kind of a convention in teaching computer science. When we need a placeholder name for things, we use sort of like foo, bar, baz are kind of like, there's like a list of kind of commonly accepted and commonly expected dummy names for things like, say, variable names or something like that. So foo is just a placeholder word here for whatever class name you might actually see in practice.
Okay.
But yeah, but if I go a couple slides back, in this case, it would look like this is what it would this is how it would more or less appear, as like you have an element, in this case a div, that and in its class attribute it includes the class foo. If this is what it looks like in markup, this is the rule that targets it. It's that dot foo. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Actually have a related question to
Sure.
that. So I think I'm still kind of confused about like how to use a class
Okay.
like in HTML. Like when you say like it's like targeting, I don't know, like sometimes it'll be like body or like paragraph. So
Sure.
like,
Well,
how do you use class?
so we can do the this will be a little clearer once I get into the code demo. But basically, like imagine that sort of imagine a page where you have sort of let's say you have kind of 3 modules of text, right? And they have and say sort of 3 boxes with maybe black borders and 8 pixels of padding. And that's like just a default, and that's a default style you're using for all of the text boxes on your page, right? For all of the containers that maybe contain, and then maybe within each one of those, there's a bunch of paragraphs, right? But it's a reusable style that you're going to be applying multiple times and reusing on the same page. That's the kind of time where you would write a class name. Like those container elements would all have a class, like say, text area or something like that. And then in your style sheet, you would write the rules for what that border looks like, what that padding looks like, what the margin is like. And that way you write those styles once and then you reuse them over and over again in your document.
So if I wanted to like apply it to a certain paragraph in the document, for the div that the paragraph belongs to, you would just put div class equals that certain style sheet name. Okay.
Yes, you would, yeah, exactly. As long as the class name in markup in your HTML lines up with a class name in your style sheet, then this style will apply to that element.
And then if we use the ID, like would the ID rules, like even if it was within the same div as the one in class, like would it read the ID rule over the class, or does it have to be in different divs?
Okay, no, an element can have both an ID and a class, but as far as sort of like which rule overrides which, I think that's determined basically just by the order you write things in the style sheet. Let's play with that. When I let me see. I've got let me make a note here to do that when we get into the code demo. I'll just show it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So, let's see, where was I? Okay, yeah, we were talking about color. So then you'll notice that I've just been using words like the names of the colors, like green, blue, red. That is one way that we can declare color names. There is a list of named colors that you can use in that you can just use those color names in your style sheet. But this might not be consistent across browsers. And so really I tend to just use black or white. Those are kind of the only ones where, because those are, you know exactly what hex or RGB values those are going to correspond to. But otherwise, unless I'm rapid prototyping, I'm usually not going to use named colors. The most common ones that you're going to use are either hex or RGB. These are the kind of things that you would say copy out of Photoshop or something like that. Hex values are going to be defined by a hash and 6 either letters or numbers. And then RGB values are going to be 3 numbers, but a value between 0 and 255. One for the red, one for the green, and one for the blue. RGB is cool because RGB gives you an optional alpha channel. You can see what are called RGBA values, and that allows you to dial in transparency. So those you declare the same. You declare the red, green, and blue values as between 0 and 255, just as you do in a normal RGB declaration. But then you add a number between 0.0 and 1.0 for your transparency. So let's talk a little bit about fonts. By default, the browser actually only comes with a relatively small set of fonts that you can expect to just work on any computer. There's a full list of them here at cssfontstack.com. You can see we have, kind of a handful of sans serif fonts, a handful of serif fonts. Like this is what 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 17 serif fonts. That's really not a big choice, and one script font, etc., etc. So these are basically the only fonts, and it tells you how likely, what the support is. And you can see it's like some of them, it's more likely that more likely that Mac will support it and not Windows. And on some of them, it's more like, on some of them, it's the other way around. For instance, here, Windows 65.94, Mac 0. By default, remember, by default. So we're really limited to a pretty, we're limited to a pretty small set of values here, but we can augment this really easily. We have options like Google Fonts. Google Fonts is a big selection of fonts that are hosted by Google, and that you can easily copy paste embed into your own projects. Saves you this time. It gives you a lot more options than the web-safe fonts, and it saves you the effort of setting up your own custom fonts. Although that's actually not as hard as it sounds either. It just takes a little more time, and we're going to talk about how to do that in just a second here. Let's take a look at Google Fonts. So we've got a bunch of fonts here. Let's just say Sure. Or actually, I like this one. So we can sort of like try it in a few options. We can either download the font completely. We can either download the whole font family, or we can just select a certain style, and you can see it generates a style sheet link tag. And then we could just paste this into our document. Again, we would want to paste this in ahead of our own style sheet. We want the inclusion to be there first. But this would allow us, like, we paste this into the head of our document, and then and that imports the font into our style sheet for us. It's really simple. In the case that you haven't found a font in the case that you can't find the font you want on Google Fonts, you can set up what's called a font face rule. This allows you to upload your own font files and import and raw font files like TTF files or whatever, and use them in your style sheets. This can be kind of time consuming to set up, but okay, yeah. So what you do is you upload font files, you link them into your document, and or into your style sheet, and then you define them as a font family, and then they're available for you to include in the rest of your document or in your styles. These can get kind of verbose, especially if you're using a lot of custom fonts. Like, for instance, let me show you the here. I'll pull up just the I'll pull up the fonts.css file for a project I'm working on right now. So in order to have normal and italic for the same for a given font size, I need to include both the normal and the italicized versions of the font file. So this is just to set up two fonts. You can see it's, you know, there's a lot of stuff in here, and it sort of and it adds and it can stack up really quick. But there's a handy tool that makes setting these up a lot easier. Let me jump over here and set it up. onlinefontconverter.com. I usually like to just check. I usually leave it just default. It loads with these boxes checked, and I usually leave it that way. Different computers or different types of computers are going to want to default to different kinds of font files. Like Macintosh files prefer Macs prefer TTF. I think Windows prefers EOT or WAF, and then SVG loads in the fonts as an image file in the case of like modern, like in the case of just like complete fallback. So it's in the interest of compatibility, of maximizing compatibility, it's a good idea to just use all of these, all four of these font formats. And checking this font face box, it'll generate the CSS for you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop a font file in, which I guess will be okay. And then I click convert. And now I download. And I'll show you the contents of this folder. So I unzip, it downloads a zip file. I unzip that, and inside, I have .eot, .svg, .ttf, and .waf files, and let's just pop this open in Sublime Text. And it's generated the font file for me, or the font face CSS for me. So so using this tool saves a lot of time when setting up custom fonts, because now I can basically just copy paste this in, and as long as I make sure that all these URLs line up, all that work is done for me. So let's go back to the last thing I'm going to talk about with respect to font is icon fonts. Sites that use a lot of icons used to use image files for all those icons, but that is that involves loading large image files, either one large image file or lots of small image files. And the preferred way to do it now is to use an icon font. This is a customized font that, rather than being full of text and number characters, is full of glyphs, like kind of like a Wingdings type font, but things like search bars, social media icons, hamburger menus, things like that. It loads faster than images. It looks better than images, because since these are fonts and they're vector based, and they can scale to different sizes and retain their resolution, as opposed to images where you would get either pixelation or artifacting. And it's really easy to change the size and color and things like that, because they follow, it's a font. So as far as CSS is concerned, they just follow the same kind of text rules. They follow font size to change size, and color to change the color. There's a couple options here. Google has a set called material icons, and then I'm also particularly fond of an app called IcoMoon. But let's come back to, I mentioned M, the relative unit based on font size. So if an element's font size is 16 pixels, 1 M would equal 16 pixels. 1.5 M would be 24 pixels, 2M would be 32 pixels, and so on. This makes it really handy to use your font size as a baseline for proportionately sizing things to that. For instance, if you want you want line height to be equivalent to half the text size, line height equals 0.5 M. And then wherever you change your text size, the things that you want proportional to that will always just match to it. There is a second unit called rem, so which just stands for root M. So M will always be based on whatever the inherited font size of a certain element is, whereas rem is always refers to the font size declared for the body. So, for example, if the font size declared for the body is 16 pixels, any element, no matter what the declared font size for that element is, okay, let's say the font size declared at the body level is 16 pixels. And then we have a div, and the font size declared for that div is 20 pixels. In the context of that div, 1 M will equal 20 pixels, but 1 rem will still equal 16 pixels. So rem always goes back to what the font size is for the body.
Wait, can you repeat that again? I'm getting confused. Like,
Sure.
You said 1M equals 16 pixels.
So 1M refers to whatever, 1M is just whatever the font size of a given element is. So if you have a div that where the font size is 16 pixels and you apply to that element padding of 0.5 M, since that element's font size is say that element's font size is 20 pixels and you say 0.5 M, that will be that will compute to 10 pixels. If you change the font size of that element to 16 pixels, 0.5 M would equal 8 pixels. If you change it to if you change the font size to 14 pixels, 1 M would be 0.5 M would be 7 pixels, right? Whereas rem only ever looks at what the font size is in the styles declared for the body. So so they're always relative, but just sort of like M will choose whatever will be based on whatever the font size is in a given context, like, you know, whatever the inherited font size for an element is. But rem will only ever be based on what the font size is for the body. Is that clearer? Or
Yeah. So like, yeah, rem will only look at body.
Mhm.
Body is a type of element, right?
yes,
And then M changes as you change the font size for that element. It doesn't only look at the body.
yep,
Okay.
yeah. I'll
Okay.
demonstrate this as well. So I know I'm kind of throwing a bunch of stuff at you right now, but there's let's see. There's just a couple more things I want to talk about. With respect to when you're sizing a box, the default way that this is done is that the way that the browser does this by default is that setting the width on an element sets the width for the content area, and then border and padding are added. So if you set an if you have a div and you tell it width 300 pixels, but then you add 2 pixels of padding and 2 pixels of border, you're going to end up with something that actually takes up 308 pixels of width, because you have 2 pixels of border and 2 pixels of padding on the left for 4 pixels, and 2 pixels of border and 2 pixels of padding on the right. This can be really confusing at first when you're like, I'm setting a width, but that's not how wide the thing is, you know. But there is a way around this, because you can tell it there's a property there. You can just set you can set a rule of box sizing equals border box. And what this does is that the width property sets the total width, including border and padding. And this is, and I'll demonstrate this in just a second. So here's a little widget to demonstrate this. And remember, content box is the way things display by default. So I have, so if in content box, if I do width 100% and then add a 10 pixel border and 5 pixels of padding, you can see that it overflows, right? The content area is matching this width, but then when we add border and padding, it overflows. We end up with something that's 30 pixels wider. If I change this to border box, you can see that now, instead of like sizing the content area and then adding the border and padding, now 100% is the measurement from outer edge to outer edge. So one thing that I have just kind of gotten used to doing is just setting a rule at the top of my style sheet that just sets all sizes to border box. And I'll show you that in a moment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the code from last week, and we're going to make some changes to it. We're going to add some styles. I got to reload it, but I made a color palette on this site. This is a neat site, by the way. It lets you upload an image and then generate a color palette based on that image. So that's what I've done here. I'll pull in we'll pull in a web safe font. We'll pull in a font from Google Fonts, and we'll throw in the font that I set up that I made on Online Font Converter. So let's do this. I prefer so this is where we left off last week. Let me do this too. Before I jump in and just start changing this, let me remix it. So the first thing we're going to do is, you can see I've included the normalized CSS style sheet in my document, or I've just copied it over and included it here. So I'm going to add it. And you might not see any changes right off that. It might not be apparent. Let's just like go back and forth and see if anything is. I think you can see the title, like the size of some of the H1s and stuff changing. Yeah. But the padding around the sides of the page is gone now. But basically what this has done is that by including that normalized.css style sheet, I'm able to now I'm basically able to assume that this is the blank slate that will apply. You know, this is like a blank slate that'll apply in any browser, and I can look at this in any browser and it'll look like this right now, which gives me a good baseline to start writing my own styles on top of. I don't have to, the thing, I don't have to download the file and add it to my project though. I can, this is hosted on what's called a CDN. A lot of third-party code that you're going to end up including will likely be hosted on a CDN, or a content delivery network, which basically is just a distributed set of servers all over the place that are all over the world that sort of host mirrors of files so that it can be served quickly from anywhere. This gives you the advantage of not having to say, you don't have to include other, you don't have to take up space on your server for something that's hosted elsewhere. So I can just take this, I can go to this page. I can copy this this address, and let's see. Okay. That did not work. Let's see. Okay. So this one should. Yep, that one's loading. And so now this gives me the advantage of not having to host the file myself if I don't want to. In fact, I'm going to do just that. I'm going to delete this file. So let's do this. Let's get that font. Let's get those font files in here. And let's add a file called fonts.css. And I'm copying the content of that font face file in here. Now I just need to make sure that these URLs point to the things in my asset folder now. So I need to go to each file, copy its URL. Let's see, which one was that? That was the WAF, I think. And then the TTF. And then EOT. Both there and there. And then I'm going to do this too. I'm going to I don't like that it what I'm doing here, I don't like that it that it split these off into a separate font face declaration for like a different file type. So I'm just merging these into one. And now, okay, so now if I go to my style sheet, I should be able to do, let's do this. What did I call? Yeah. And now, Right. Oh, I haven't included the font style sheet. So, or the base style sheet for that matter. So now I need to do this. And now I have a digital, and now I have this digital font. If I want to pull in a font from Google Fonts, I can do, I like the lightweight one. I can either copy these style sheet links, but then I kind of have a bunch of, then I'll have like, you know, a whole bunch of stuff stacking up here. I'll have a lot of link tags in the head. So there is another option, which is if I go here and click at import, I can copy this. I don't want to copy the style, the HTML style tag here. I just want to copy the at import URL. And this allows me to just import that that font into this CSS style sheet. So now that Google font import is handled in my font CSS file along with setting up my my custom font. So now Oswald sans serif. So so now I can just do this. And boom, I have that font now. So you can see that already we're starting to things are starting to change. Let's pull in some of this color. Let's use this this tan as the background. So now you can see I've added some padding. I've set my base font size and I've changed the background color. Let's center some text. Let's put let's target this article and let's just center all the text in that article. Notice that it lines up the pictures too. So text alignment rules are really pretty powerful even for things other than text. We can let's put a border around it. Maybe this let's do this light blue. Okay. And now you can see there's a little bit of a border around this. You can see that there is some distance between, I added a margin and I added interior padding. So you can see that there's some distance between the outer edge and the inner content. And there's some distance between the outer edge and the next thing. Things we can do. Let's take a look at styling these links, because sort of now that we're starting to work in another color scheme, the default blue and purple links don't really look so great here, right? This purple doesn't really work against this tan background. Let's say that let's do this too. Let's so normally this is probably not going to look great, but just for the sake of, normally when we approach changing color on a text element, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is add a color value. Add a color value. So you can see now this has changed color. The thing is that with links, it's a slightly different story, because because each link has multiple states to it, and each state has a color. See that as I'm holding this, I'm holding the mouse button down, and this is red. This is what's called the active state. When I release, we jump to that section, and now that link turns purple. That's the visited state. So let's just set colors for all of our links here. There's also the base state is just a dot link, or I'm sorry, these should be colons. My mistake. The focus state is if you're navigating through using the keyboard. Notice how this is me hitting the tab key and then shift tab to move back. And notice how it applies that border. That's the focus style. That's distinct from the hover style. But we can target both of them. Let's say see how whenever I hover, now let's also take so now I've completely customized all of the states of those links. Those states are always just a::link, a::focus, a::hover, a::active, and a::visited. So yeah, these are the five states of a hyperlink, the 5 states of an anchor: base, focus, hover, active, visited. So you can see that it's like a little bit more in depth than just changing the color the same way that you would on a on like a normal text element. There's a little bit, it's a little bit more in depth. Let's get into that that question about okay, cool. So we have something here with both we have something here that has both an ID and a class on it already. So let's say that class container we'll just match these styles. So now, right, this is inside, the article was inside a container. So now we have sort of two of those things there. But let's do this. Let's change that border rule and see which one, and I'm honestly not sure how this is going to work out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rule targeting this by its ID. And I'm going to see which, I'm going to set a different border color and I'm going to see which one holds up. What I think is going to happen is that if I put the ID rule first, this one will override it. Whereas if I put the ID rule after, it'll override this. So let's give that a try. Aha, okay. ID trumps class. So that's good to know. Yep, either way. Okay. So okay, so that answers your question. A rule declared in an ID will always override a rule declared in a class. Now let's do another thing here. Let's talk a little bit about taking ordered lists and unordered lists and restyling them. Because here's the thing, particularly unordered lists are way more ubiquitous than you think. They're all over the web. They're all over web pages, but they just don't look like bullet lists. They've been repurposed and restyled. Most times you see like a nav bar at the top of the page with a set of links in it. That's usually an unordered list with the bullet points removed and restyled to be in a line instead of in a column. So let's do that here. Let's turn this header into something that looks a little bit more like an actual header. I'm going to do this too. I'm going to. So let's go to. I'm going to start by just centering the text in here. And now I'm going to show you there's another way that you can select things, which is that you can chain selectors together. So here, I have a header. Inside it, I have a nav, and inside that, I have an OL with class default menu. I could do this. And let's do this. Let's throw that same class name on this unordered list down here. By the way, this is when you just so you know, I know that when I was when in the code lecture, I was using like very like just sort of dummy names like foobar as my class names, but in context, class names are going to describe what are more going to describe sort of what you are styling the thing to do. You know, for instance, class name container is a you know, that's a descriptive of what that set of rules does, right? Default menu makes something look like a default menu. So here, let's say default menu, I can override the base, the default style by doing this, by using this property. This is going to turn off the bullet points and the numbers. See, the numbers are gone. I go down here, the bullet points are gone. But say I only want to turn off the bullet points up here. I can be more specific with my selection. And now, first I'm targeting the header, and then I am targeting any children in anything inside that header that has this class. So this is what's called a parent-child selection. And I could get as specific as I want it with this. I could be I can also specify if I had multiple things that that were different kinds of elements that shared the same class name. I could chain, if I do element name and class name together with no space between, it's selecting something that matches both of these. Has to be both an ordered list and have the default menu class. So here, now you can see the numbers are gone up here, but the bullet points are back down here, even though this still has the same class name. Let's inspect this a little bit. So you notice how there's this margin, like sort of there's that little green box there. That's the indentation, that's where it would have put the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Since we're getting rid of those, we want to take that out. You can see here in the default styles, there's like margin block start, margin block end, and padding inline start. So I'm just going to add those rules. Okay, so padding inline start is the one that does that border, but I also wanted to take out the margins across the top. So now, one thing that's important, I did this in the code inspector, not in my editor. So if I want to save these changes, I have to copy and paste. And now those changes carry over. So now you notice that sort of like we're getting somewhere. This already looks, you know, cleaner and cooler than it did before. Actually, I might leave that margin in place on top now that I think about it. Take that out. We're already getting, you know, we're already getting towards something that looks a little bit more like a little bit more like a nav bar, but it's still in a column. And that's because if we look at this, these list items are following the conventions of what we called last week. Remember, we talked about the two default methods, the two default ways that an element will render into a web page are either block mode or inline mode. And these are rendering as block mode. They're taking up the full width of their parent container, and the next element after them is starting on a new line. But we can override that. So we can do this. Now they're all in a row. I can do this. Oh, something I should tell you about about writing out these values. Let's do this. You'll notice that here I just wrote run number, but here I wrote 2. I'm going to explain that in just a second. I just want to show it in context first.
Actually, why do you put the li at the end? Why did you put the li at the header dot default menu?
Right,
li?
because here I am targeting these individual list item elements.
Okay.
I'm styling those. Like if I take all these rules out, see how it goes back to being in a line like that, or being in a column.
Yeah.
I'm right now. I applied a bunch of rules to the ordered list, and now I'm applying styles to the individual list items inside of that.
So in order to do that, you have to put the li after the class.
Yep. Yeah, the class name is referring to the ordered list, right? The class name refers to this element, the OL. So
Yeah.
so what I'm doing here is I'm targeting the li inside that is the list items that are children of this element with the class default menu.
Oh, so like what you were saying earlier, like the children go after the class.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So it's like the list items that are children of class name default menu. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let's go back to oh, and I also want to so let's look at something here. I sort of wanted to call your attention to the fact that I wrote 2 numbers here, but only 1 number here. Let's look at the let's look down here at this descriptor of the box, or this diagram of the box model that shows us the computed values for our margin, our border, and our padding. When I put 1 value, as I did with my padding, it's the same on all 4 sides. When I put two values, as I did with my margin, I put 0, 0.5 em. That did, notice that top and bottom margin are both 0. Left and right margin are both 8 pixels. If I want to specify a different value for each side, I can do that. And it moves, and it's and in that case, you write 4 numbers and they start with the top edge and move clockwise. So if I do let's do it with the, let's do this. Let's do it with the border so that oh, right, you can't do it that way. Or I'll do it with the padding. Notice how on the top, it's this is the first digit is the top edge, second digit is the right, third digit is the bottom, fourth is the left. So we're starting from the top and moving clockwise with each of these values. Although that looks really ridiculous, so we're going to take it out. Another thing we can do, I'm going to actually put that up to 1. And I'm actually going to move, I'm actually going to do this. Yeah, I like that better. Yes?
I have a question. So I kind of understand the margins and the padding, but what's the border exactly? Is that
sure?
Just...
So again, remember that padding is just a distance. It's the inside distance between the content and the outer edge. Margin is also just distance. It's the distance between the outer edge and the beginning of the next element. The border, as I turn the border on and off, notice that that outline around each element disappears. I can set it to be as big or as small as I want. I can have it display differently. Like it's a little hard to see at this there we go. So that's, you know, a different style, and I can change its color. So the difference is that the border of an element actually has a visual property to it, as opposed to being just a measure of distance. You know, something like that, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in the diagram, I just wasn't
sure. Yeah, because it does. If you're looking at it in a box model diagram, it looks like that's showing you how much distance it takes up. But bear in mind that it is actually that it's not just a measure of distance. It's actually a graphical property. Anyways, let's see. Notice how when I toggle this on and off, these things get closer and further apart. That's got to do with what I was talking about with box sizing. When I was talking about that before, if we look at each of these, let's give this, let's do this. Let's use a special trick mode. Remember last week, one thing that we talked about in last week's lesson was that inline elements only take up as much space as the content inside them. You can't specify a width for it. In this case, it would be nice to specify a width for these things. But if I put it back into block mode, these are all going to go back to being in line or in one on top of the other instead of in a row. But Luckily, we have a combination mode. And we're going to talk more about this next week when we get into talking about positioning. But inline block allows us to explicitly set width and height and add that to an inline element. But if we go down, if we look at this, you can see the actual computed notice that the actual computed width that we're showing is 92, even though I said 70. That's because we're adding it's 70 plus padding, border, and margin. So the way around that, let me do something here. The way around that is to use that box sizing property. And actually, I'm going to do this. I could apply it to just this element, but I'm going to want all the elements on my page to behave this way. So this is a thing I do. This is a line that I usually add at the beginning of every style sheet I write. The asterisk is what we call a wildcard selector. And that has the function of acting as a completely global selector. That's selecting everything. So by adding this line of code, I'm telling every single element on my page to follow this rule. And now you'll notice that these are total of 70 pixels. If I scroll down, you can see that the content area has squished to be 48 pixels. So you can see how that would be, how it makes a lot more sense, you know, how it can be a little confusing to if you declare the width of something as a certain width and then it's not that width. This is kind of like if you find yourself having that problem, check to see what your border, what your box sizing property is doing. Let's do this. Let's talk about how to let's talk about image sizing, because that was something that people asked about. I've got two images on the page. And they're both using this image attribute. I've mentioned before that the image attribute is an outdated way to set the image to set the width of an image. So instead, set it in here. I now have a little bit more control. Yeah, let's make it a little bigger. Let's make it a little bigger like that. If I wanted these two images to be sized differently, I could do that by simply adding class names to them and then targeting them differently. So now let's make And now you can see that I've targeted them separately. So now this picture is 400 pixels wide, and this picture is 220 pixels wide. So, oh yeah, let's talk about setting background images, because we can we don't have to use solid colors as backgrounds on web pages. For now, let's just use an image. Let's just find something free. Sure, we'll go with this. Or I don't know. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll do this. So let's see, desktop. All right. So I have this pattern that'll tile pretty nicely. And let's just make that the background of the page. Again, notice that I'm using a comment to, this is how you write comments in CSS, is with this is like a backslash, an asterisk, and then you close it with an asterisk and a backslash. But I don't want to lose this line. I just want to replace it, but I don't want to lose it. So I'm using a comment here. Simple as that. I can, and I have a pretty fair amount of control over how this thing displays. I can change its size. I can change its size. I can stretch it vertically or horizontally. I can tell it to just fill or cover. Actually, kind of like that. I can tell it to either, right now it's tiling in both directions. I can tell it to tile only vertically, only horizontally, or not at all. I can also if I set the back, this is an effect you've seen a lot, I'm sure. If I set the background attachment property to fixed, the background doesn't move even as I scroll. And I can still set a color if, let's see, if I do, notice that I can still have a background color. And now it's sort of just like this background image just shows up as a stripe down one side. So this is so background images are pretty simple to work with. But bear in mind that you can't drop in background video. You can't drop in videos here. This only works with image files. The examples we looked at last week that had like videos as the background of a page, that's a slightly more advanced workaround that we'll come back around to when we actually start looking at how to working with media elements. So I think I answered most of the questions that came up with this. How's everybody feeling about this? Is this making sense? Is there anything you'd like me to go over a little more?
Is there any way we can like see your like .css like file code?
Yep.
Like,
Yeah,
the
this will
code?
I'll share this. I'll add this to the Git. So there's that team page on Glitch. I'm going to add this to the class examples section. And then you'll be able to pull it and like if you just click the remix button, you'll be able to copy all the code over and just like have your own version that you can play with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so for next week, I'd like you to add some CSS to the page that you made last week. But actually, now that I know, and you know what, we didn't go over icon fonts, so don't worry about that. But include instead of an icon font, make that a import a font from Google Fonts. Okay. And I'll tell you what, I will set up a starter project, just my own starter project for you to work from, because I really do not like that new one that's way overcomplicated. So just watch that for that for me. I may get that to you tomorrow. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just make a little boilerplate page, and I'll ask you to edit the CSS for it. How's that?
Okay.
Cool. All right. I will. Okay. So that's all for tonight. Again, actually, tell you what. If you want to play around with using icon fonts, I'll count that. I'll give you all that. I'll call that like an extra credit bonus point. Since we didn't get it, since I didn't cover it in the code demo. If you figure out how to throw fonts in from either Icomoon or Material Icons, I'll give you bonus points. But again, as you go into styling with CSS, I remind you again of that webaim.org where the contrast checker was when you're thinking about color schemes. Keep that in mind. Here's an article on CSS tricks about sort of idea of using normalized CSS and using CSS resets. Coolers is the site that I made that color scheme with. Lets you plug it, upload an image and pull a color scheme from it. CSS Font Stack has all the web safe fonts. Fonts.google.com has Google fonts. Icomoon.io and Material.io are icon fonts, and also onlinefontconverter.com. If you want to try, downloading a font from dafont.com or something like that and making a custom version, you can do that too. Okay. So that's it. I will send an email out and reiterate that assignment once the video of this class has finished uploading. And I will, oh, actually tell you what, one last thing. For next week, when you submit your assignments next week, please send them ahead of time. But please send them before class starts. And also, you can invite me. Tell you what, instead of sending this link, do this. Search for my name in this box here, where it says user search. I think just search for my name. Just search for Carl Hone, and then click send invite, and that'll send me an invitation. So, and that way I'll immediately have access to edit your code. So, please submit your work submit your work using that invite link from now on. Okay. Cool. Thanks for sticking with me. I know that this was a big info dump day. And I will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Have a
Good
good
night.
night.
Thank you. Night.